Mark Pryor made some comments about the bullpen. Michael Grove starting the first game of Dodger spring training. What does that mean for his chances at making the big league club? And we get a question from a listener about Julio Urías and how his stuff will fare down the line. That's what's on tap, so make sure you keep it locked on Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. This is a daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. You can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers and subscribe in each of those places, and you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listener watching, I am Vince Samperio. That's my co-host, Jeff Snider, and together we are Locked On Dodgers. We're both lifelong Dodger fans that have spent time covering the team, currently cover the team, press box, locker room. We've also been all over Dodger Stadium as fans and, have made the Dodgers part of our daily lives and are making it part of your weekday daily lives for the last few years now. We're here to bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue. Been a while since it was both of us, but glad to be back here, Jeff.
Yeah, one of our listeners, Ryan Burlow, commented on YouTube yesterday, said he doesn't know why we keep introducing each other as co-hosts and saying it's just me today when we ought to just say sometimes it's me, sometimes it's him. And Ryan, this is not just to spite you, but we are together, and hopefully during the season we will be together a lot more often. During the off season, we try to make it at least a little bit of an off season for ourselves too, and doing a podcast 5 days a week is a lot. And, but we are looking forward to being together most of the time during the regular season. And now that spring training has started, it's spring training for us too. We'll try to ease back into this.
Yeah. I guess I don't know. I'm not in the best shape of my life, but I'm in much better shape than I was at the end of last Dodger season. So it's a win.
And I'm not in the worst shape of my life, but I'm a lot closer to the worst shape of my life than the best shape of my life.
Yeah. So we got you're a guy that eases into it with the season, and then some people come in ready to go, and some
Yeah,
people work their way into it.
I'm the guy. My theory is it's a long season, and you got to worry about losing weight over the season, so you got to come in with some extra poundage on because it's a long season. It's I'm like a bear preparing for hibernation.
Yeah, there we go. All right, we're gonna get into a few things today. No real news from Dodger land. It was team photo day, so the Dodgers were putting out uh, photos from throughout the day in a video that was in the style of the Freaks and Geeks uh, intro. If anyone watched that show, so that's fun. Go check it out on their socials. But we're gonna start off with talking about the closer role and specifically some comments Mark Pryor made, and we'll get straight into it. He said, "This is to." He spoke to Dave Vassay, and if you're on social media, there's Dave Vassay had some fun last night, so you go
Dave
check that out.
Vassay, I do know his name.
Yeah. He said, quote, "I think it's pretty clear that we don't have a defined closer, and that's always a hot topic, but we're going to go into it. We feel really good with our guys in our bullpen. We'll just kind of see how the spring plays out, whether it's somebody like Evan Phillips or Yency Almonte or Alex Vesia or Caleb Ferguson. I think we all have guys that we trust with their makeup to handle that. Granted, the ninth inning is completely different. It's a way different ball game than sometimes in the sixth, seventh, and eighth. No matter who you're facing, it's just closing the game out is a unique role in this game. But, we'll see how it plays out. But we feel really good about all those guys' makeup. And eventually things flush themselves out and work themselves out on their own. And I think we'll be in a pretty good spot. Finished up with, but I think collectively our bullpen should be in pretty good shape. And we have a lot of talent down there. And I think we have a lot of depth. A lot of the guys that we sign, the Shelby Millers, guys like that who will come in and be part of the mix. I think that allows us to take our time and figure out what's the best course of action for the organization as a whole. Now, not sure if these were names that were maybe top of mind because they maybe threw off the mound when that same day that he spoke, or whether this is something that the Dodgers have been discussing. But Phillips, Almonte, Vesia, Ferguson being mentioned as guys that could be that closer role is at least a little bit interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, when his main point is we have no idea who the closer will be, if anybody, maybe we shouldn't read too much into what names he listed. But yeah, I mean, at least subconsciously, there's something there. And like you said, it could have just been, you know, four guys in the room, like Steve Carell on Anchorman. I love Lamp. Are you just saying you love things that you see? Maybe he just saw Ferguson and thought, sure. Because yeah, for me, Caleb Ferguson would be closer to bubble of making the roster than possibly the closer. And obviously Ferguson has been very good at times. He was very good at times last year, but he really struggled the end of the season, and is really kind of the secondary lefty. But I yeah, the fact that he didn't mention Daniel Hudson or Brusdar Graterol, who, I think if you and I were choosing a closer, that might be, my choice and your choice, at least at some points in time. And so he didn't mention either of those guys, which, Hudson has a little ankle issue right now. Maybe they're not totally sure if he's going to be on the opening day roster because of that. And Graterol, I don't know. So I am having a hard time reading too much into it, but I'm also having a really hard time not reading anything into it.
Yeah, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to take these comments and go with them, and turn them into a podcast segment. But yeah,
Locked on
Ferguson.
speculation about the Dodgers.
Yeah, Ferguson would be interesting in the fact that if you really believe that for the most part closers, if you take away the pressure of a ninth inning or the pressure of closing out the game, the ninth inning usually is kind of the easiest inning to go, just for the simple fact that you're most of the time going to get a clean inning to start. And for a guy like Ferguson, who was good last year, but not necessarily, the dominant guy we remember from 2020, and not entirely sure if that's the same guy you're going to get. That might be a reason he would be considered for the ninth, where it's like, okay, we have all these other good relievers that'll be in a bunch of different other positions. And, if we're up 4-1 going into the bottom of the ninth, then yeah, maybe Caleb Ferguson's that guy that we throw. But yeah, I would imagine it's just a matter of him just naming some names, but Ferguson being one of those names is just interesting, like you said, because he's not entirely, we're not counting him on making the roster if we counted right now, I don't think, or he would be one of like 3 or 4 guys that would be fighting for the last spot in a potential bullpen. Because I think I went through it the other day talking to somebody, and I don't remember having him on there. But like I said, it's a spring. Daniel Hudson's supposed to throw Saturday. We'll get into Michael Grove, who's supposed to start on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, the Dodgers, like I said, the closer situation, it likely will figure itself out, and it is going to be a matter of it. And, at the very least for Graterol, that's kind of the same bucket as it would be for a guy like Ferguson, where Graterol is not a guy you bring in to get strikeouts. So he's not usually a guy you're trying to bring in situations where there's multiple runners on base, unless you're going straight for a double play, which he does have a pretty decent ground ball rate. But he's a guy that limits hard contact. And when you're a closer, even if you're not striking out, if you're limiting hard contact, for the most part, it would, most of the time when Graterol gets scored on, it's a little fluky, which would be annoying more than anything. But that role would seem to suit him a little bit better than, a fireman type role.
Yeah, Brett Phillips just jumped into my mind when you were talking about closers limiting hard contact and it usually working out okay. For some reason, Brett Phillips came to my mind. But yeah, we'll talk more in the next segment about, kind of that bullpen outlook, and because it is a pretty crowded house in the bullpen. I am a fan of the closer by committee, as I've said before, and I really, my main opinion is I don't want Evan Phillips or Yency Almonte as the closer. Because those two guys have shown the ability to come in and be nails and do what they need to do with runners on, with whatever the situation is, and so I want them available when the situation calls for it, and not when the inning calls for it.
Yeah. All right. Alluding to that, Michael Grove is slated to start the first Cactus League game, so that got us thinking about Michael Grove and kind of if he has a legitimate shot at making this opening day roster, or is he going to be a guy that, for sure starts in the minors and works his way in. So we'll get into that conversation. First, let's talk about FanDuel, because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. With the midway point of the NBA season here, it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores and threes drained. You can even build out a bet with some same-game parlays for a chance at a bigger payout. Lakers play tonight. They're playing the Warriors. The Lakers have 23 games to figure out their season, so I feel like they're going to play extremely hard. If LeBron plays and Anthony Davis plays and D'Angelo Russell plays, if you want to put a same game parlay for all them scoring more than 20 points, that'd be the way I go about it. But that's up to you if you want to do that. You can try out and make any bet you want on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's easy to use, safe and secure. So don't miss your chance to get in on your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Check out Locked On MLB Prospects with host Lindsey Crosby. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, Jeff. So Michael Grove time. He, like I said, is expected to start the Dodgers' first Cactus League game. There's really, no glory or anything in starting the first Cactus League game. There's been some random guys that have started the first Cactus League game for the Dodgers in years past. But it is a point in the sense that us and the Dodgers, most closely the Dodgers and Dave Roberts and staff, are going to be looking at Michael Grove to see what he can bring. And is it a matter of, we've seen his name thrown around, if you read about the Dodgers a lot, as like filling in the Mitch White type role where starter, reliever, fills in where you need him, Ross Stripling role before that. But yeah, it's a matter of, is that a role the Dodgers are going to need once the season starts? And is that a role that we can see him filling? And does that mean he has a chance of making the opening day roster?
Yeah, friend of the show, Keith Law, kind of said that when he was writing about the Dodgers top 20 prospects. He said he's got 3 major league pitches and a 93 to 97 mile an hour fastball that gets chases above the zone, and 2 55 to 60 breaking balls with a lower spin slider that misses bats in the zone and a higher spin curveball with depth. What he does not have is something for lefties, and his delivery isn't very easy to repeat, with a plunge and a pause in the back that disrupts his arm swing. The Mitch White role looks like a perfect fit for him, as a starter role is probably a stretch without a changeup or split. And yeah, I mean, having 3 pitches, you would think he could figure out how to get lefties out. So far, he hasn't really. But yeah, so he could be a guy who, whether it's, the problem is a lot of his value would come from his ability to go multiple innings. It seems like, if he was going to be a long reliever, that's what the Mitch White role was. And if you can't get lefties out, you can't really go multiple innings unless it's a very righty heavy team you're going up against. A lot of pitchers, like starters who turn into long relievers, it's more about the fact that they don't have enough stuff to get through a lineup multiple times. And maybe that's the case with Grove, that he could get some lefties out the first time through and he just wouldn't be able to fool them a second time. So maybe he could go 2 or 3 innings in a game. Yeah, because obviously there's not room in the starting rotation for him right now. And realistically, there's probably never going to be. Like, he'd probably be fine to make a spot start here and there. But the Dodgers have 5 starters right now. And then you have Ryan Pepio, who is a better prospect than Michael Grove. And, if he can get that changeup figure back out, much more likely to be a productive big league starter than Grove is. And then you have Bobby Miller and Gavin Stone, who are, way ahead of Pepio. And so if Grove is going to be on the team, it's going to be as a reliever. And if that's the case, then yeah, it might make sense for them to just move him to the bullpen and just put him in the bullpen right now. And that's where we get to what we kind of alluded to in the first segment. And I've got names to talk about when we're ready to, of just how crowded that bullpen is.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to. And if he's a guy that is, that swing role where it's reliever first and then starter to fill in, yeah, he can fill that role. Obviously, he did it a couple times last year, not on the roster for a long time, but would come up and make those spot starts. And the other part is, and right now we can get into some of these names, is the Dodger bullpen. There's always that one guy that's kind of there, the last guy. You prefer to only use them in mop up duty or in the reverse of mop up duty when you're down by a lot. A guy that, Phil Bickford last year to a certain extent, not Phil Bickford 2021, but Phil Bickford last year was that type of guy where you didn't really want to see him come into big spots. And, that might be where we're at with Michael Grove, at least early on initially. Like I said, if he can't figure out how to get lefties out and, he can't just quite all put everything together. But I mean, you go up and down and you look at pitchers that, are for sure making the opening day roster if healthy. And you got Almonte, you got Gonsolin, you got Gratterall, you got Hudson, you got Kershaw, you got May, you got Miller, you got Nelson, you got Phillips, you got Syndergaard, you got Julio, and Vesia. That's 12 names right there. And that's already, that's 12 names easily. So Michael Grove wasn't in that. Caleb Ferguson wasn't in that. Other guys, Victor Gonzalez, so-and-so, so on forth down the way. Those guys weren't on there. So, yeah, what are the realistic chances of Michael Grove being able to crack that?
Yeah, and you listed 12 names. Can you say your 12 again?
Yeah. Almonte, Gonsolin, Gratterall, Hudson, Kershaw, May, Miller, Nelson, Phillips, Syndergaard, Julio, Vesia.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out who, because I was counting 5. Oh no, 6. Yeah. So yeah, that's yeah, maybe you have one that I don't, but I've got in the bullpen at least Almonte, Vesia, Phillips, Hudson, Gratterall, Shelby Miller. That's 6 of the 8 bullpen spots. And then, so that leaves, if Ferguson really is as much of a no doubter as Mark Pryor's comments might have made it seem, that's 7 of the 8. And there's really one spot. And that spot is for one of Phil Bickford, Justin Brule, Victor Gonzalez, Andre Jackson, Michael Grove, Ryan Pepio. And then you get to the non-roster guys, Matt Andrees, Dylan Covey, Tyler Sear, Robbie Erlin, Adam Kolarek, Jake Reed, Nick Robertson, Wander Suero, Jordan Yamamoto. I mean,
don't think you named Jimmy Nelson.
Oh, Nelson, that's right. Oh, and he is healthy, huh?
Yeah, that's supposedly.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's hard to see. And really, what this probably comes back to is what we've said many times: these decisions are always made by injuries. Daniel Hudson's ankle injury is probably more serious than we know of right now, or somebody's going to have arm fatigue or something. There's always going to be room. That there's going to be openings. The question is, how high on the list of guys to take that opening is Michael Grove? Because even in that list of guys who aren't in line for a spot, Bickford, Brule, Gonzalez, Jackson, like Andre Jackson has pitched in relief in the big leagues and pitched really well in that role. Pepio, maybe they want to leave Pepio as a starter, so they'd rather have him starting in AAA than in the major league bullpen. But I mean, they have several major league quality relievers among these non-roster invites. So it's I don't know how high Michael Grove would be on that list. And he is starting the Cactus League opener. I don't know that means anything though, other than it's his day to throw or whatever. It lines up in the schedule, and he's started at big league games, so it's like a big league starter. Even though he's not a big league starter. I don't know.
Yeah, and the other part with him is if the Dodgers weren't in such a pinch last year with injuries, and would Michael Grove even have come up? Like, he was a surprise when he came up initially. And then, they brought him up a couple more times, but that's because he was already on the roster and, they were able to utilize it. But, obviously the injuries happen every year and we see things like this happen. But, the Dodgers were literally down with injury and in a pinch where he was the guy that was, on his 5th day or whatever, or already had the 4 or 5 days rest, whatever it was. And I don't think he'd even be a guy we'd be talking about even consideration for the major league team this year if it wasn't for those few spot starts and appearances last year.
Yeah, and he's actually the only pitcher in Andrew Friedman's entire executive career that Andrew Friedman is ever called up straight from AA. It's like, it just doesn't happen. But yeah, it worked out for him. And yeah, I would expect that Michael Grove is spending most of the season in the Oklahoma City rotation, unless they decide his future is as a reliever or on another team. I mean, and really that they've probably made that decision already. He's either going to be a reliever or he's going to be a starter on some team that's not the Dodgers. And so maybe it comes down to, do they want to trade him? Do they want him starting in AAA to showcase him and, to show him off to other teams and as trade bait, or do they want to try to use him as a long reliever in the major leagues?
Yeah, and those questions will get answered. But until then, like I said, we get to stretch these out and talk about them. Final segment is going to be talking about Julio Urías and a question we got from a listener just about how his stuff's going to fare down the line in his career. But real quick, just a reminder to make Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. And thank you for doing so if you already do so. All right. So, like I said, we got a question from a listener on Julio. I know you talked about Julio and a potential, deal or is Julio going to leave, whatever the case is. But the question is from No Way You Faded on Instagram. He said, since Julio had a major shoulder surgery back in 2017, does that mean he will not age well? Could that affect his velocity down the road? He said he's been hearing a lot of discouraging comments from certain Dodger fans about velocity and on his future with the Dodgers. He says, he averaged 93 last year, but would hit 95, 96 a couple of times. On top of that, has elite fastball spin, and everything else still looks effective. He says if this season, if he averages 94, 95, our fans still going to think he won't age well. And then in terms of that narrative, is being 6 foot tall a bad thing? Does that type of frame also factor into the fact that he won't age well? Do we think that Julio should add a sinker cutter to his repertoire? Would that take him to another level? And then regarding advanced metrics, why are FIP and Sierra not favoring Julio? Yeah, and then he goes on to add about, Julio managing runners in scoring position well, great stats in terms of opponent average, whip, etc. So basically, he's just trying to figure out, why some fans maybe believe that Julio might not age well. And, is it a matter of us trying to talk ourselves out of him already, just in the case that he leaves and, maybe they don't want to get hurt?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some of that. I also think some of it is just the fact that pitchers don't age well. Like, very few pitchers. And anytime you say something like this, people will talk about Nolan Ryan pitching until he was 955 years old and throwing his last pitch 800 miles an hour with a torn UCL. The reason Nolan Ryan is the guy that everybody brings up is because Nolan Ryan is the one example. Like, most guys aren't Nolan Ryan. That's why everybody knows who Nolan Ryan is. That's why I named my kid after Nolan Ryan. Most pitchers don't age well. Clayton Kershaw doesn't throw as hard as he did when he was 26. Every pitcher pretty much who, Justin Verlander's an example of an exception. Justin Verlander's career looked like it was over in about 2015. His velocity was down. He was struggling. And then he turned his career around, got the velocity back up even higher than it had been, turned it around. We don't know exactly what went into Justin Verlander's turnaround. Max Scherzer doesn't throw as hard as he used to. Everybody or close enough to everybody to say everybody gets worse as they age. And so I think that's mostly what it is. I think there probably is some bit that the velocity thing does eat on people's minds a little bit, because Julio used to throw harder than he does now. And the fact that he's already lost velocity and he's 26 years old is probably a little bit concerning to people. Well, if he's losing velocity by 26, how much is he going to lose by the time he's 31? And right now he's still very, very effective. He's as good as he's ever been. But that's with averaging 93 and occasionally hitting 94, 95. If Julio was averaging 91 and occasionally hitting 93, would he still be as good? And that's a question we don't really know the answer to. He does have elite spin on his fastball, but some of that has to do with the velocity. He has enough velocity that when combined with the spin, he gets a lot of swing and miss. He has a lot of what they call rise on his fastball. It's not actual rise. Fastballs don't rise. It's physically impossible, but it means it doesn't drop as much as the human eye expects it to. And so people swing under the ball because their brain says, oh, it's right there right now. So by the time you swing, it's going to be right here. You swing and you're under it. And so you are either swinging and missing or popping it up or whatever. And that's, I don't know if that goes away, if the velocity continues to drop. So this question, when he says, if Julio averaged 94 or 95 next year on his velocity, would that calm some people down a little bit? I think it would, because reversing that negative trend on the velocity drop would be a big deal. I have some thoughts on the FIP stuff too, but you have any thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if the velocity were to continue to go down, by nature, there would be a loss of effectiveness unless he makes, a little bit of an adjustment. And based on what we've seen so far in his career, he would be able to, make an adjustment. The reason Julio's so good, even with the fact that he has lost a little bit of velocity the last few years, is because of his secondary pitches. He's able to throw those in pretty much any count. He's able to throw the changeup. He's able to throw the curveball. Like I said, in any count to, 4 strikes, to get guys to try and chase, whatever the case is, to limit hard contact. So, the word crafty lefty is a cliche, but it also is a thing. When you throw from the left side, for whatever reason, it's a little bit, it gives you a little bit of benefit, and you can maybe last longer in the league than maybe a right-hander would, with throwing similar velocity and similar shapes of pitches and everything else. So yeah, with Julio, all that makes sense. The loss of velocity, yeah, would I like to see him throwing 95 consistently? Yeah, that would be an ideal world. But I also like to see Clayton Kershaw still throwing 95, at least somewhat consistently, and that doesn't happen. And Kershaw made that adjustment once he started losing the fastball. We saw him struggle a little bit the times where his fastball, and when he does struggle, it's when his fastball and his slider don't have much differentiator, and they kind of look like the same thing. And that's where he gets hit a little bit. And even when he does give up home run, sometimes it's usually on a slider that doesn't really slide. So yeah, there's always going to be cases for that. But with him as a pitcher, I believe he'd be able to overcome it. With him as a player, I'd be able with him to overcome it. If he left the Dodgers and the velocity, that's kept going down gradually, I don't know if depends what team he'd go to, is if I'd say he'd be able to fare well down the line, because it's not always on the pitcher to figure things out. It's also on the team to try to figure things out or try to suggest things as well.
Yeah. And one thought I had while you're talking about crafty lefties, part of the thing is Julio's not looking to get paid like a crafty lefty. Julio, and that's the thing. I don't think people are concerned that Julio is going to be terrible. I think the concern is that he's not going to be worth the contract that he's going to be looking for. And, so yeah, if his velocity goes down and he turns into a crafty lefty who, can still win you 14 games a year and post a 3.6 ERA, there's a lot of value in that. And he can stick around in the league for a long time like that. But that's not what he's looking to get paid for. And that would be a disappointment if you sign him to an 8-year, $260 million deal, and what you got was a crafty lefty, you'd be disappointed. The other part about FIP, when he asks, why are FIP and Sierra not favoring Julio? I won't look at Sierra because I thought that was interesting to mention that one. Sierra, nobody uses Sierra anymore. It hasn't been used in about a decade. But it was kind of based on the same principle as FIP and all of these things. Any advanced stat that's trying to quantify how good a pitcher is going to try to remove things out of the pitcher's control. And that means FIP is based on 3 things: strikeout rate, walk rate, and home run rate. That is what FIP is based on. And so when you've got a guy like Julio who doesn't strike out very many guys, that's really what it boils down to, is when Julio's strikeout rate is higher, his FIP is lower. If you look at his career, in 2019, strikeout rate 9.6 strikeouts per 9, FIP was down at 343. Next year, 7.4 strikeouts per 9, FIP up to 372. 2021, 9.5 strikeouts per nine. FIP was down to 313. Last year, 8.5 strikeouts per nine. FIP was up to 371. It's just a calculation because I mean the theory behind it is once the batter has hit the ball, unless he hits it over the fence, everything after that is out of the pitcher's control. And so you can control giving up enough hard contact to allow home runs, and you can control strikeouts and walks, and you can't control anything else. That's the theory behind it. XFIP doesn't even believe the home run part. XFIP says all you can control is ground balls and fly balls, and sometimes the fly balls are going to go out. So XFIP is, instead of taking the pitcher's individual home run rate, it takes the league average home run rate and applies that. So XFIP is really just based on strikeout rate and walk rate. And, you could just look at a guy's strikeout rate and walk rate and know, what those are. But the fact is, Julio, for basically his entire career, his career strikeouts per nine is 8.9, averages less than a strikeout per inning. His career strikeout percentage is only 24.4%, slightly higher than it was in 2022. Overall, Julio just doesn't strike out a lot of guys, and yet his career ERA is 2.82. And we now have a sample size of 600 innings in the major leagues that Julio Urías doesn't give up runs, even though he doesn't strike out very many guys. And at some point, the advanced stats, either we just have to accept the fact that they're never going to get it right about Julio, or they're going to have to adjust. And, the programmers are going to have to write in hard code a Julio Urías line, just subtract half a run from his FIP because he gets soft contact. We don't understand it, but but the fact is, last year, Julio's success last year probably isn't sustainable. His BABIP allowed, batting average on balls in play, was only 229 last year. His career BABIP allowed is 271. And so, last year, Julio was even more effective than usual at not allowing hits on balls in play. And maybe it was because he figured something out, or maybe it was just one of those years where he got a little more lucky than other years. I would never go ahead.
I was going to say the point on this too that's interesting is that if he, the big conversation is always around the innings, and every time we seem to have a conversation about Julio in season, it's, oh man, he was only at 70 pitches through 6 innings and they still pulled him, and whatever the case is. And that's normally because he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, because the way he gets out is by, getting guys to make soft contact. You look at his average exit velocity and it's always in the 86, 87 range for the most part throughout his career. So that's one of those reasons that does happen. And another way, when you're going lucky and you don't, however many, let's just say there was 10 starts where he left the game with like 80 pitches or less, or 85 pitches less, and he couldn't have gotten another one. Well, that's 10 more innings you're adding to this. If you think it might be a little bit of bad luck, or it might be, or good luck on his end, or the luck, regression to the mean, then maybe that's what they're saving him from as well, going through into that 7th inning, into that 8th inning when his pitch count is pretty low.
Yeah, I made that point yesterday talking about the report that Julio's friends are upset about Julio not having pitch limits and stuff, and that's why he's going to leave. And the idea that Dave Roberts cost Julio the Cy Young Award last year, because if he had thrown more innings, he would have won the Cy Young Award. I believe that most likely what would have happened if he had thrown more innings is his overall numbers would have been worse, because he would have been worse in those innings that he threw, partly because of luck and partly because he would have been, tired. All of those innings, extra innings, would be tired innings, 4th time through the lineup innings, the kind of innings where guys often get hit hard. That's why Alcantara won the Cy Young Award, because what he did was so remarkable, to be that good while pitching that deep into games, facing guys 4 times through the lineup pretty much every game and still being really good, and so, yeah, Julio's FIP is never going to be good. And we're just going to have to settle for the fact that his ERA, the thing that actually matters, the thing that actually reflects what happened on the field, that was good. And that's all that really matters. But chances are, if you're looking for Julio to get love from FIP or from projection systems, which have the same flaws, you're never going to be happy, because he is not the kind of pitcher who's going to get love from those things.
All right. That's going to do it for today's episode, unless you got anything else, Jeff.
Did you bet on Mac McClung on FanDuel to win the dunk contest?
I didn't bet because California doesn't have it, but I told people to. So
Yeah, you told him to bet on Mac McClung?
yeah, I told him to bet on Damian Lillard to win the 3-point, and I told him to bet Mac McClung to win. Even though Mac McClung, I think, was the favorite, so it wasn't like a big, like, oh my God, bet this guy. But
I'm just still a little bit offended that the NBA made a nerdy white guy win the dunk contest in Utah. That's a little bit on the nose, don't you think? Sincerely, nerdy white guy in Utah.
He's giving a hope to all the other people in Utah that, they one day could win the dunk contest.
They could, yep.
All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. If you're not already listening every day, add a couple more days to your week. We are into the season, and we're going to be talking Dodgers the rest of the way, all the way and through hopefully late October, where we're still talking about relevant Dodger things. So join us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. You can find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you need to get a hold of us. You can also get a hold of us via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car or if you're at home. Terry Smart Device Play Podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.